Okay, so tonight we're going to be learning about the month of Iyar because it is Rosh Chodesh. The sun is going down as we speak, so it's still the last minutes of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And I want to talk about Rosh Chodesh Iyar and its relationship to Sefirat Omer. Most of the teachings tonight will be from Rav Ginsberg, from this book called Mivchar Shiurei Hit Bonanut, where he goes to the 12 months of the year, fairly long articles, incredibly revealing. And so I will give over some of what's in this piece and a few other bits of information about the month of Iyar. So we've done this before, but I'm going to mention again that every month, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, and then later commentaries, Kabbalah, Chassidut, there are certain associations we have with each month. There is the letter of the month, the sense of the month, the tribe of the month, a permutation of God's name special for the month, part of the body, one of the elements, a planet, a constellation. And through learning these things, that's how we understand what energy to plug into. It's very, very, very important because in the secular Gregorian calendar, each month doesn't really have its own personality, its own energy, its own psyche. It's true, January, February, March, these are the winter months. And we'll have either secular holidays or different religions' holidays. And people relate to the month, but it's not essential in the month itself. But in our calendar, which is a lunar calendar, which follows the months, the changes, there's a certain energy of every month. So that's what we're going to be learning about partially tonight. So we're going to begin with the letter of the month. The Sefer Yetzirah says, through the letter Vav, the month of Iyar was created. The language is very important here. It doesn't say the letter Vav symbolizes the month of Iyar, but saying through the letter Vav, the month of Iyar was created. So grammatically, what does a Vav look like? It's a straight line. It's a straight line which has a little crown on the top, but it's just a straight line. And in Hebrew, grammatically, the word and is the letter Vav. In other words, you want to say and in a sentence, you add the letter Vav to the noun or the verb, and that becomes and. So in other words, the Vav, just like its shape, is a connector. It connects two things, either above and below, or this way, or whatever dimension. So in relationship to what's happening now, we're counting Sefirat Omer, and it's a very, very unique mitzvah because it takes place during 3 different months. It begins in Nisan, it continues the entire month of Iyar, and then it reaches its completion in the month of Sivan. The only thing that's like this really is that the holiday of Hanukkah begins in Kislev and it ends in the month of Tevet. It spans 2 months. And the 3 weeks that we have where we commemorate the destruction of the temple is partially in Tammuz and partially in Av. But Sefirat Omer spans 3 different months. And what's in the middle? What's the Vav? is the whole month of Iyar. In other words, we count the Omer for approximately 2 weeks in Nisan and a week, actually a little bit less in Sivan. But the whole month of Iyar has to do with Sefirat to Omer. And it's a connecting kind of month. It's a connector. So we're going to see later, hopefully we'll have time, other manifestations of this letter Vav. But we're going to concentrate mostly on the sense of the month. Every month has a sense. Now, according to Sefer Yetzirah, there are 12 senses. Of the 12 are the 5 usual physical senses that we usually think of is seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and smelling. So the 5 physical senses, but there's another 7 according to the Sefer Yetzirah. So what is the sense of this month? It's called hirhur, or thought. The sense of this month is thought. So someone would say, well, what kind of a sense is that? We actually we're thinking 24/7, even when we sleep. And even if we don't remember our dreams, our brain, our thought process is 24/7, always. But a sense of thought is one who has some control over their thoughts, who is able to form their thoughts, control their thoughts, direct their thoughts, focus. That's what's called a sense of thought. So it's an obvious connection to the month of Iyar because the main mitzvah of this month is Sefirat to Omer. And as we're going to see in many different ways, we're not just counting days. We're trying to make great rectifications in what are called our midot, in our personality, in our emotional framework. And that happens really not really through the emotions. It happens through the mind. That's how we rectify, heal, direct our emotions. We all know when we let our emotions run rampant and our thoughts are not controlling them. They're being like dragged behind. That's a whole different situation. So Rav Ginsberg says that there's really two, here the word is hirhur, thought, but the other word, the more well-known word for thought is Makshava. Makshava. And if you permute the letters of Makshava, it spells Choshev Ma. One who thinks of, now Ma, usually we think of as a question. Ma nishtana halayla zeh. Why is this night different than all other nights? Ma is a question, but Ma also means essence. In Hebrew, the word for essence is mahut. So thought is focused thought, is complex thought. We all know our mind is just kind of just rambling on all the time. But Makshava is when we take over and we're controlling our thoughts as much as is humanly possible. So Rav Ginsberg points out just a beautiful thing. The same letters of Makshava, if you permute them, is Besimcha. Same letters. Makshava, Mem, Chet, Shin, Bet, Hey. If anyone wants to write that down. But if you take those same letters and you permute them differently, it's Besimcha. And so Rav Ginsberg, the theme of this whole Torah that he's giving over is that even though it doesn't appear on the surface, this is a month of great joy. Now he points out this is somewhat paradoxical because we have a statement, Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. When the month of Adar comes in, the month of Purim, we increase our joy. We usually don't think of Iyar as a month of joy. And in fact, it's somewhat the opposite, because the first 33 days of the Omer, we have semi-mourning practices. We don't cut our hair. We don't listen to live music. We don't have weddings. And this is a whole other discussion, which we'll probably get into when we discuss Lag BaOmer. But this is a semi-mourning period. And the simple reason given is that the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died during this time period. So we have this semi-mourning. When we get to Lag BaOmer, we'll see it's more complicated than that. There's more historical development than that. So it's like paradoxical. We have like real laws about semi-mourning, and yet Rav Ginsberg is teaching that the inner sense of this month is joy. So why does he say that? So he explains, first of all, the sense of the month is thought. And again, when you take the word Makshava, the same letters is B'Simcha. So for those who are familiar with Rav Ginsberg's teaching about the Sefirot, so he teaches that each of the Sefirot has an inner dynamic, an inner dimension, a psychological dynamic. And of course, we don't have time to go through all of them tonight, but the inner dynamic of the Sefira Bina, which means understanding, one of the intellectual Sefirot, as in Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So the inner dynamic of understanding is joy. And why is that? The word in Hebrew for meditation, there are two words really. One is hit bodedut, and one is hit bonanut. Hit bonanut comes from the word bina, to understand. So he explains, and I'm sure everyone will understand on whatever level we take this, but the goal of Jewish meditation is much more than just quieting our mind or feeling an inner peace. These are very valuable things. Don't get me wrong. These are very valuable types of meditation. But a uniquely Jewish meditation is meditating on the Torah, on verses in the Torah, words in the Torah, concepts in the Torah, the name of God, the Sefirot, the levels of soul, the letters. This is uniquely Jewish meditation. Meditate on our prayers. Meditate on the Psalms. Meditate on a teaching. And the goal is to come to new understanding, to come to what's called a chiddush, an innovative thought, something we didn't know before, that something new is revealed to us. And for those who have had this experience, it doesn't have to be in meditation, but you have a realization, an epiphany, a momentary moment of clarity. This is a pure type of joy. In other words, it's not dependent on something coming from the outside to make us joyous, to make us happy, to fun, however you want to put it. It's not something from the outside stimuli that is giving us reason to be joyous. Here it's coming from deep within, and it's like a new realization, a revelation. We're not talking about, the heavens opening up, just a new thought, a clarity. In our world, to have a moment of clarity is something very special. And it's a source of great joy. So he said that's the secret of this month. Why? Is because counting the Omer has to do with, as I believe we learned last week, the idea of every day making some kind of a tikkun, coming up with some new perspective on our lives. And we do this through interchanging the Sefirot. Again, I'm assuming that many of you have tuned in for a lot of the classes. If you haven't, I'm still trying to explain exactly. But Sefirat HaOmer we translate it as counting the Omer. But it's Sefirah is the same as the Sefirot, same as the divine channels through which God creates and maintains the world. So every day we combine two of the Sefirot, but it's really happening up here. When we combine these Sefirot and we understand the energy of each of the Sefirot and each of the days, then we do what the Arizo taught us, that the objective of Sefirat Omer is to draw what's called mochin into the midot. In other words, draw intellect, focused thought, what's called kavana, into our emotions. And that's the way that we fix them. That's the way we direct them, improve them, purify them, refine them. So Rav Ginsberg is teaching this is all happening through thought. And that is the sense of this month. Now, another connection with Bina, again, we said that the Sefira of Bina, and for those who will take a look on my wall here, this is the Sefira of Bina, right here. This is Chachma, Bina, and this is actually the invisible, as it were, Sefira of Dat. But Bina, the inner dynamic, is Simcha. Now, the thing is we have this concept called the 50 gates of understanding. Chamishim Sha'arei Bina. And obviously, these 50 gates are connected to the 49 days of the Omer and the 50th day, which is Shavuos. The 50th gate, which we're told is very elusive. It says that even Moshe Rabbeinu only reached the 49th level of understanding, though there's a number of explanations of how he actually did reach the 50th level. So this inner dynamic of joy, in a sense, this is how we climb the mountain from slavery to freedom. Because if someone is depressed, this person can have all the money in the world, all the power in the world, all the trappings of success, but they're depressed. So what good is any of it? What good is any of it? That the secret, actually there's a pasuk, Sod Hashem Lireyav. The secret of God are to those that have awe of him. Now the amazing thing is that the gematria of this, it's not the whole verse. These three words, Sod Hashem Lireyav, equals simcha, equals joy. So what's the secret of God? Or in our terms, what's the secret of connecting to God? And especially the point of godliness within ourselves is through simcha, is through joy. There's a great book called Happiness is Serious Business. It's a great book. I'm forgetting, it's a very famous author. It just slipped my mind now. And the basic idea, though, is many people think to be either I'm a happy person, or I'm not a happy person. It's in my genes, it's in my makeup, in the way I was raised, whatever it is. And there's nothing I can do about it. It's just my nature. And the whole book argues this is not true. But it is true that we have to work at being happy. It's serious business. It's attainable. It's attainable, but we have to work at it. Okay, so I want to go back to this idea of the Arizo, that someone is waving. Toby, is it possible for you to hold your question to the end? Is it possible? Because I'm just afraid I'll give a long answer and get off the track. You'll be the first one, okay? The teaching of the Arizo, that for a successful Sefirat HaOmer, we have to draw mochin into the midah. In other words, again, the idea of focused thought, really meditating, and to draw it into our I wouldn't say lower being, but our emotional being, our more behavioristic, instinctual type of acting, in order to raise them up, refine them, and to have true rectification. So Rav Ginsberg takes that idea and he really runs with it. He really runs with it. So he brings a verse, and actually it's not in everyone's Haggadah, but at least in Nusach Sfard and Hasidic Haggadahs, during the benching, during the after blessing for the food, there's a special Harajuman that we only say once a year. And it's Harajuman, I'm going to paraphrase it, I don't have it in front of me. Harajuman Shehu Yom Tov, Harajuman Yom Aroch, Yom Shetzadikim Yoshvim Be'atorotehem Be'roshehem Ve'nehanim Meziva Shechina. Once a year we say this at the end of the Seder. And it says, it's, O merciful one, let this be a good day. This is a long day. Now this has to do with transcending time. The end of the Seder is truly transcendent. A day that the righteous will sit with crowns on their head, and they will be blissed out in the presence of the radiance of the Shekhinah. Now this is talking about the world to come. In the world to come, the righteous will sit with crowns on their head, and they will be blissing out because they'll be in the presence of the radiance of the Shekhinah. It's just, for me, it's always a very special moment at the Seder when you could say this and close your eyes and imagine what this level is. So Rav Ginsberg explains that the actual literal meaning is with crowns in their heads. It says atrotehem bi-rosheim, not on their heads, but in their heads. So he says that this is, in a sense, a different idea of drawing mochin into midot. This is drawing what's called God's surrounding energy into us. God has two types of manifestation. One is called sovev, called olamin. There's an aspect of God that is transcendent. It's beyond the world, beyond time, beyond space. And the other manifestation is God in the world, manifest in the world. That's called God fills the worlds. So he explains, what does it mean they have crowns on their heads, which really means crowns in their heads. It's a level of consciousness where, and this is not just for the tzaddikim in the world to come. The Rabbi Nachman and other Hasidic rabbis explain the world to come is a world that is always coming in the present. It's in the present, just like for God, past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously. The closest we can come to understanding this is when matter speeds up and approaches the speed of light. Well, time slows down, and theoretically, at the speed of light, there is no time passes. And that's why, just in physics, when a beam of light, which is traveling at the speed of light, leaves a light source, whether it's the sun or a galaxy 3 billion light years away, the experience of the light beam, no time passes. As Rav Ginsberg says, the most mystical ideas in the world right now is physics and quantum physics, because it's very hard for us to get our mind around this. But this idea of sitting with crowns in our heads, meaning we're drawing God's surrounding energy into our present energy. And it also means that we can draw the future into the present. So this is a very, very profound idea. Now, this goes back to the letter Vav that we started with, because in biblical Hebrew, not modern Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, when you put a Vav before a verb, if the verb is written in the past, you translate it as the future. And if you put a vav before a verb that's written in the future, you read it as if it's in the past. The idea behind this is to show that the Torah is eternal. There is an eternal aspect, that we're not just reading stories that happened thousands of years ago to individuals. We're reading about energy that exists all the time, and it applies to all of us. That's this idea of this vav. It's called vav ha'hipuch, the vav that switches future to past and past to future. So Rav Ginsberg says that we have an interesting thing. The sense of the previous month of Nisan, when we came out of Egypt, for many of you were at the different classes that we gave about Nisan, and we talked a lot about speech and the connection of speech to freedom, to Pesach, to the Haggadah. We're not going to go back on this, but we have an interesting idea here. Usually, we think that thought comes first and then speech. So why isn't the first month of the year, Nisan, thought, and this month, Iyar, speech. It's just the opposite. Now, unfortunately, many people speak before they think. So that we all do. We should think before we speak, but we all know how many times we speak before we think. But he points out a completely different aspect here. He says that speech is revealed. When we speak, whatever thoughts that are hidden in our mind, unless someone's a mind reader, we have no idea what anyone else is thinking. Only when we speak does it become revealed, whatever thought process we have going. Thought is very hidden. So he said that Pesach represents revelation. God revealed himself in the 10 plagues. He brought us out of Egypt with miracles galore. So there was a revelation going on. Iyar is much more inner. It's all happening through a thought process. It's true, we have to say out loud, we have to count the 50 days out loud. But still the work, the spiritual work of Iyar is much more hidden. So in Hebrew terms, we say that there's two aspects to the Torah. There's Torah shebenigleh and Torah shebenistar. There's the revealed Torah, and there's what's called the hidden Torah. The hidden Torah are what we would call today Kabbalah, the secrets, the inner dimensions of the Torah. So Rabbi Ginsberg is just pointing out that that's the dynamic that's happening right now. That the whole mitzvah of Pesach is to tell the story, is speech. And in fact, the Haggadah means to tell. So that is the sense of the month of Nisan. It's about revelation. Iyar, this month, the work is much more inside. It's an inner kind of nistar kind of work. So what I want to do now is, when we take a concept, it's very, very important to see how it's manifest in other ways. So I'm just going to review what we've said already, but just to show that we have like a dynamic here. This idea of taking intellect and drawing it down into the emotional aspect of a person. Then we have this idea of taking the surrounding energy of God and bringing it inside, in an inner sense. And we also mentioned there's this idea of taking from the concept of the world to come and to make it part of our present. In other words, drawing the future into the present. So in all of these, what we're doing is through thought, through Makshava, through meditative thought, we're drawing something that is beyond us into us, whether it's conceptually, spatially, or time-wise. So this idea is a very profound idea. And again, we do it through Makshava. And I don't know if anyone's tried to meditate when they're depressed. It usually doesn't go very well. In other words, we need to be in a certain state of inner joy and peace to be able to truly meditate. And when I say meditate, it's very important. It doesn't have to mean that you sit for an hour in meditation. Sometimes it means just putting your hand over your eyes and delving deeply into a thought for 1 minute. For 1 minute. Listen, that's what we do when we say the Shema. The Shema takes, what does it take, 10 seconds to say? And not all three passages. Just the verse, Shema Yisrael. That's maybe the most potent of all Jewish meditations, is the Shema. So meditation can happen in quite literally 5 or 6 seconds. But if we know how to draw the future into the present, those 5 seconds can qualitatively be like 5 minutes or 5 years. It's all quite relative. Okay, so I want to end with a story. Actually, Rabbi Ginsberg brings this story. I've heard it a number of times. It never ceases to make a very strong impression. It's a true story that the Friedeker Rebbe, I say the previous Rebbe, but the previous Rebbe, when he was still in Russia, and quite literally, he almost did not make it out of there because they were at one point very determined to execute him. But when he was under investigation, and at one point, one of the investigators held a gun to his forehead and cocked the trigger, and the Rebbe didn't flinch. And the interrogator said, in a bit of amazement, is like, "Aren't you afraid?" And he answered like this. He said, "Someone who has one world and 2 gods, he would be afraid. But someone who has 1 God and 2 worlds, he is not afraid of anything." The first time I heard that, it was like, whoa. Can you say that again? I want to make sure to remember this. So I will say it again. Someone who has 1 world and 2 gods, he'll be afraid. But someone who has 1 God and 2 worlds, he's not afraid of anything. So this whole idea, I'm going to bring it back to the Vav, because the Vav represents, in a sense, the merger of time and space. Time, as we already showed, that the actual function of the biblical Vav in front of a verb transcends time. It has the ability to change the past to the future and the future to the past. And when we look at space, space is basically an expanding cube. That's why on Sukkot, we shake to the 6 directions. We shake to the 4 cardinal directions, above and below, because space is basically an expanding cube. So the letter Vav represents both space and time. And we know in modern science that they are unified in the 4 dimensions, in the space-time continuum, that each affects the other. So there is this idea, though, through meditation. And I'm going to add one other thing that I didn't add before, and also an amazing thing. Remember, I said that the letters for Makshava, when they're permuted, equals besimcha. Now, the amazing thing is, both of those words, Makshava and Besimcha, equals in Gematria 355, which is Sefira, the Sefirot. And that, what are we doing during Sefirat HaOmer? We're working with the Sefirot in order to make the tikkunim that we want in our lives. So here we have Makshava connected to Besimcha, connected to Sefira. This is a very potent triangle here that we have. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, and I'll end with a blessing. And I'm going to call on Toby first, but I have to limit it to not more than 10 minutes, and then I literally have to run. So I'll end with a bracha that in the month of Iyar, and we just celebrated Rosh Chodesh, we could be like a living Vav. We can connect all the Sefirot together. We can connect to our inner soul. We can connect to the Rabboni Shalom, Master of the universe. We can connect to other people, and we can all make the kind of rectifications that we all need to do, and the world very much needs.